Okay, great. Well, yes, lovely to see you all. Thank you guys for coming. Um, so today is just going to be review. So all I really have for slides and things is a couple pointers about, well, basically one is a reminder about how the grading for this course goes, and then a talk through what the structure of the exam is going to be like. And then honestly, the rest of the session is what questions do you have? What topics do we want to go over? If people don't have any particular things, I'm very happy to just run through a kind of spate of things. Yeah, hopefully at this point you feel prepared. So that's really all I wanted to do. Let's get started with the review. So the first thing, again, is a reminder about how your grade is determined for this course. Your grade is going to be determined by your score out of 100 possible points. And the points come from three places. There's the homework assignments, there's the midterm, and there's the final exam. The final and the midterm are both worth 40 points each. Homework is worth a maximum of 20 points. So I'm going to take your top 10 homeworks, right? And I think there's 12 homework assignments. So this means you have some give, right? I'm not going to give you the extra points if you do all the homework. The max you can get is 20 points here, but also if you do the homework, that's 20 points. Right? It's worth noting that I do not care where you get your points from. So it's mathematically possible to, well, I think, let's see. If you've done all the homework up till now, you technically need to do one more homework, even if you got a perfect grade on the midterm, to then be done with the course, because you need 55 points or more to pass. So in theory, you could do all the homework so far, get a perfect 40 out of 40 on the midterm, and then do one homework when we come back and then never show up again. And that is, I'll be hurt, but that's okay. So that's the important thing here, right? I don't care where the points come from. I don't care percentage-wise how well you do on the midterm or how well you do on the final exam. All that matters is that points make prizes. So I'm going to take your total from your homework, your midterm, and your final exam. I'll add them together. I'll divide that number by 10, and then I'll round to the nearest 0.5. That's your grade. Again, friendly reminder about that. Before we go on and talk about the actual exam, any questions on that process? Is it clear? Does the fact that I don't care how well you do on the midterm make sense, right? It's okay. I always get an email with someone like, oh my God, I only got like a 60% on the midterm. Does this mean I'm going to? No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Yes. Why do you round it? Good. So that's actually a requirement. So the university requires that we go to the nearest 0.5. That is beyond my pay grade for explaining why. I just do what they tell me. Yeah. So, cool. Okay. And no other questions? Does the general notion of the grades and how your score is calculated make sense? Going once, going twice. Beautiful. Let's talk about the structure of the exam. So, again, the midterm, 40 points. It breaks down in the following. There's going to be 3 points in definitions. That is, there's going to be 3 definitions that I'll ask you. Then there'll be 3 analysis questions. So this is the kind of ones we've done a few of, where it'll be like, okay, suppose this sentence is a contradiction. What can you then say about this argument? So that kind of thing. So there'll be 3 of those. Then there'll be 6 points in TFL symbolization. So I'm going to give you a symbolization key and 6 sentences, ask you to, well, symbolize them. Then there's 7 points in what we'll call TFL semantic notions. We'll talk more about the details in just a second. There's 6 points in validity via truth tables. So what I'll do here for these questions, give you an argument in English and ask for you to test whether the argument's valid using tables. Right? So if you're going to use tables, which language do we do the symbolization into? TFL, right? Don't do it into FOL. There's always at least one or two people who do this, right? Every year. It just happens. Right? Then finally, the last portion of the exam is on first order logic. So I'll give you a FOL symbolization key, ask for you to symbolize 7 sentences, and then finally, there'll be some FOL semantic notions, right? So this will be building interpretations to do things. So we'll talk about the 2 semantic notion blocks in a little bit more detail. But one thing to take away here, right? Note, and I've stressed this a couple times in the tutorials, if you're pretty good at building tables, if you know how to do TFL, you're going to do okay. And that's by design, right? So let's talk about the 2 parts, right? The TFL semantic notions. So basically, there's, well, we'll call it 13 points here. There's somewhere between 7 and 13, right? What I mean by that is, there's going to be a question where I'll give you a sentence, and I will say, hey, give me a complete table for this sentence, right? It'll have 2 or 3 atomic sentences in it, so it won't be a huge mess, right? Then you'll use that table to tell me whether it's a tautology or a contradiction or neither. Then I'll give you another sentence and say, hey, is this one tautologically equivalent to the first one? Then I'll give you a pair of questions where I'll ask you to say, hey, are these sentences, these pairs of sentences, tautologically consistent or inconsistent? And then the last little block, again, I put them in here, but basically this is, I'll give you English arguments, tell me whether they're valid using tables. Note that these are worth multiple points. That's because partial answers get partial points. Right? So for example, in the ones with validity, there's 3 parts to it, right? You've got to give me a symbolization key and symbolize the sentences. You've got to build a table and then read the table to say whether the argument's valid or invalid. If you screw up the symbolization, but you still build a table that's good based on the symbolization you gave me, you can still get a point. If you symbolize it right, do the table right, but get the answer wrong, well, that's okay. You still get 2 out of 3. Basically, give me an excuse to give you points. And the same thing with symbolizations. I should stress, when it comes to symbolizations, what I will do is if you give me anything that is logically or tautologically equivalent to the thing I was originally looking for, it's fine. And so technically there's an infinite number of good answers for each question, but please, God, don't give me one that's really hard. I have a lot of these to grade. I want to go quickly. So with regards to FOL semantic notions, you know exactly what these are going to be, right? This is the stuff we were talking about last week. Right? There'll be one of each type of question. I'll give you a sentence in FOL, and I'll ask for you to use interpretations to show that it's not a logical truth and not a contradiction. So in that question, you've got to give me 2 interpretations. Then I'll give you a pair of sentences and ask for you to show me that they're not logically equivalent. So one interpretation that applies to both. I'll give you some sentences, ask for you to show me that they are jointly consistent. So one interpretation that applies to all of them makes them all true. And then finally, I'll give you an argument in FOL, and you will show me that it's invalid. So you give me an interpretation that makes the premises true and the conclusion false. So that's it. That's all she wrote. Right? Again, to go back a few slides, that's the whole structure of the thing. The practice midterm has been up, I think, since last Thursday. I forget exactly which day I put it up. That practice midterm has the exact same structure as the actual midterm, same type and number of questions. Right? Feel free to use that. I just did the sample answers for it earlier this morning. I'm going to upload them probably this afternoon when I get home to an actual computer instead of just using my phone. So yeah, that's basically it. What we'll do in the tutorials this week, we'll be going through that practice midterm, addressing any questions we don't get to address today. Yeah, that's basically it. Before closing up the kind of slide shop, again, I just want to pause, ask, are there any questions about the structure of the midterm? Is it clear? Any kind of pragmatic questions? We'll get to content in just a minute. It all makes sense. Again, it's no fun if you don't understand what I'm asking you to do. It's one thing about whether you can do it. I just want to make sure that you know what I'm asking you to do first. All okay? Yeah. No, you just have to do it yourself. I mean, just fill it in, right? So in all of these, it's going to be it's handwritten, right? So you can fill them in however you want. This is actually this is a useful point. I think I mentioned this earlier with doing the tables, but I'm happy if you use T's and F's. I'm happy if you use ones and zeros, pluses and minuses, right? Whatever you want to use to make it clear that you're talking about true and false, whatever you find easiest. But yeah, you're going to have to draw them yourself. The paper you'll get will be lined, which is helpful, but so you will all have to suffer with me about not being able to draw straight lines. It's okay. Any other pragmatic questions just about the structure of the exam or anything like that? One thing I should have said a couple weeks ago, realized in hindsight was a bad mistake. Everyone is registered for the exam, yes? If you are not registered, you go talk to your student administrator right now. Yes? Yeah, so I don't know why this is. I do not know why that is the case.
But like I am registered because I'm registered for all the other exams. So does it still mean that?
Yeah, I mean, if you've registered for this, so yeah, it should be. I don't know why. Can anybody actually see it? Is there anyone who's got it on their timetables at all? Okay, this is really, really weird. Yeah. Yes, I posted on the announcement. It's going to be at 5:30. So it's an annoying time. It's scheduled from 5:30 to 8 in the room, but it's not that long. It's not 3 hours, right? It's a 2-hour exam. I should also stress, I have given you 2 hours because I wanted to make sure that if you go through and you meticulously complete every single step of every single table, you should still have plenty of time. Right? So don't stress about timing. Right. Okay, cool. So the last thing I wanted to mention before turning off the slides, and we'll turn to whatever questions you have, is to say what we'll do afterwards, right? Because of course life does go on after the midterms. What we're going to talk about in week 8. Week 8, we're going to shift topic pretty hard, and it's a kind of filler in a way. What I want to do is talk about basic set theory and basic set theoretic knowledge. So this is really just going to be to introduce you to some machinery. We're not really going to use it much for the rest of the course, but this is something you're going to run into in future courses, so I want you to be at least vaguely familiar with some of the terminology and some of the symbols and things like this. Notably, there's no reading for it because I figure you're going to be burnt out from doing all the midterms. Yes, you're welcome. There'll be some homework on the set theory, but of course that's not until, do for lecture 9. One thing to note for the tutorials in week 8, the tutorials will be half exam inspection and half working through that homework. So I'll probably, I'm being recorded, but I'll say it. I'll probably have your exams all graded by that weekend. So I think the exams are on the 18th. I'll hopefully pick them up on the 19th and then just grade them over that weekend. What that means is that you should be able to see grades in Canvas by that Monday. Then in the tutorials that week, I'll have the exams with me. and we will go through the answers for the midterm. You can double check, grade, make sure that I gave you the right grade, that I added things up in the right kind of way, all of that sort of stuff. Cool? Yes. Oh, no, that was a thumbs up. Yeah. Okay. Nice. So that's important. That's notable, right? No worries if you don't want to come to the inspection. That's okay, right? It's just if you want to, it's fine. Cool. And let me stress two last things. First thing is, it is just an exam, and in fact, all of these are just exams. It can be very easy to get caught up in these are, monumental and life-changing and super duper important. And yeah, they are in some ways, but also it's just a fucking exam, right? It's not going to be the end of the world if it doesn't go well. It's okay. So that's first thing. Perspective is an important thing. Second thing is, of course, wish you good luck on not just this one, but all of the exams. I know you have a bunch in the coming week, so good luck with all of them. I'm sure you're going to do great. So that's it for the slides. I'm going to shut them down, and then we can basically pivot to any particular questions or topics people have. Cool? Cool. Okay. Awesome. So, what questions do people have? What would people like to talk about? Yeah.
What's the difference between the airphone sign and tailgate?
Nice. So, good question. This is the bad theater part where we have to do that. So, it's a good question. What's the difference between our little, I assume you mean the 3 dots, and our double turnstile? Oh no, I broke my chalk already. Good. So here's basically the thought. The double turnstile is always a notion that we have defined in terms of some piece of machinery. In fact, strictly speaking, there's 2 versions of the double turnstile. Now, we did actually do this, right? And I slid it by quickly. But what are the 2 different versions of the double turnstile? Yeah. So that one just means it doesn't hold, right? But that's it. But there are 2 different notions that we define the double turnstile in terms of. Yeah. So that's something we can do, right? We can write things being a tautology or a contradiction. But there's also, what's the parallel notion to being a tautology? Right? So what language does being a tautology apply to? Just TFL, right? What's the concurrent notion for FOL? What's the parallel notion? Do we remember? Logical truth, right? Cool. What's the magic words for our respective languages? Every semantic notion for TFL, we defined it in terms of what? What was the one word that was in every TFL semantic notion definition? Evaluation, right? Evaluation. So we have one version of the double turnstile that's defined in terms of valuations. Right? That applies to TFL sentences alone, and it's the kind of thing we can evaluate with tables. But we have a second version of it, right? And what's the second version of the double turnstile going to be defined in terms of? Interpretations, right? So the difference, if we wanted to draw it out between these 2, is the bit of machinery we've defined them in terms of. So now, coming back, the difference between the therefore and this. So this is just something that applies to any language, if you like. Right? It's to tell us, hey, the next thing coming is meant to be the conclusion. The stuff that came before is meant to support it. So it's using the generic notion of validity, right? And the generic notion of follows from. But this one, this double turnstile symbol is special because we've actually cached it out. We can track it with our machinery. So the deep dark idea then is whenever we're asking about this, what we're going to do is track its surrogate, the thing that we actually can track using our machinery. So there's, in some sense, a very deep dark difference. One of them is a general conception of validity, or therefore follows from. And then the other one, this double turnstile, depending on which one we're looking at, is a very particular defined concept. But these are effectively the ways we can get to this. So there's a deep conceptual relationship here. Right? Does that help at all?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool. Nice. That's a fun first question. What other stuff would people like to talk about? What would be some things that would be useful to go over? Yeah.
I'd like to know if for the FOL semantic notion, if there were some steps that we could follow just to not get lost and to be sure to cover all the points.
Sure. So for the FOL semantic notions, the thing to remember from the perspective of at least the last part of the exam, right? Constructing the interpretations, which I take it that's what you're after, right? So the last 4 questions of the exam, the last 8 points. The thing to remember here is that there's going to be 4 specific types of questions. So the first one, I will give you a single sentence, and I will ask you to show me that it's not a logical truth, and it's not a contradiction. One sentence, if you get one sentence, and I'm asking you to show me it's not both of these things, how many interpretations do you have to give me? Got to be 2, right? One that makes it true, one that makes it false. That's the first thing. Second kind of thing, I'll always give you 2 sentences. And I will say, hey, show me that they are not equivalent. And if they're supposed to be not equivalent, what's the task? What do you have to do?
One true, one false.
Yeah. Give me one interpretation that makes one of them true and one of them false. No, it doesn't matter which one is true and which one is false. All that matters is that we give different truth values to the sentences. For our third one, here I'll give you a collection of sentences. And I want you to show me that they are jointly consistent. Yeah.
Give them one valuation structure.
Yeah, not.
Interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah. Give me an interpretation that makes them all true. Right? One interpretation that makes them all true. And our last one, right, I'll give you an argument. And the aim is to show that it is invalid. So what do you have to do to show it's invalid? One interpretation that makes the premises true and the conclusion false, right? So that's the important thing here. Now, this is the aim of the questions, right? This is what the question types will be after. In this order. So for the first one, 2 interpretations, 1 true and 1 false. Our second one, 1 interpretation, where 1 sentence is true and 1 sentence is false. Third one's 1 interpretation, and everybody's true. And our last one, 1 interpretation, premise true, conclusion false. Again, that's the sort of structural thing. Now, advice with regards to constructing interpretations. We talked about this in the tutorials, but don't hurt to hear it again. First thing, if you're building your own interpretations, keep the domain small. 1, 2, 3 objects at most. Another thing you can do to help yourselves out, right, is think about these abstractly. Remember that when you're fixing the extension of a predicate, you can do it directly or indirectly. Fixing the extension directly makes your life easier. Say the extension of this predicate is this and this, or it's nothing, or it's everything. Remember, you can do this. It'll make it easier. Another bit of advice, remember you can draw diagrams. Some people find the diagrams much easier to process, so feel free to do that if you do. Okay. Should note, there's a lot more of the questions in the exercises on page 101 and 102 that we didn't do. You have the sample answers to them all, so feel free to use those as extra practice. If you have further questions or you want more, you can also look back at old midterm exams. They're on the Canvas page, and they'll give you plenty more practice of each type. Okay. So, again, the general process with these interpretations, right? This is what we're after. This is how we can target them, right? What exactly the tasks are. Other questions? Yeah, please.
Could you give a list of English words that like signal connective? So for example, the word although is conjunction.
Yeah, good. So this is a good one. I think really the ones that are kind of hard, well, let's start that over. The one that we have the most frequently, or that maybe best has the most different words, is conjunction. Right? So conjunction can be expressed, conjunction can be expressed with and, or but, or despite. Although, even though, right? So in these ones, the way to kind of track it and why it's going to be conjunction is, we'll take even though, right? Even though he's tall and handsome, he's really dumb, right? It's sort of saying, oh, these are the case, and this other thing is sadly also the case too. But despite the fact that, right? Same thing. We have to then, despite A, B. It's telling us that both are the case. So the way to kind of get to track down if it's going to be conjunction, right, is think, is the sentence requiring that both parts be true? Or is it saying that both parts are true? When it comes to things like disjunction, it will always just be or. The ones to remember though, and this is actually definitely worth going back over. That one's just busted. Are the 4 different conditionals that we can run across. So we have if A, then B. We have A only if B. We have A if B. And the last one, A if and only if. Can everybody see that? Is that high enough? Maybe not over here. But. So it's useful to remember how to treat these structures, because you could pretty much bet that I'm going to give you at least 2 of these on the midterm. So if we have if A then B, right? We know how to do this one. How do we do if A then B? A conditional B, right? And how about A only if B? How do we do A only if B?
B conditional A.
No. So the important thing to remember, right? If we have only if in the middle by itself, right? If you have only if by itself, you take the thing before the only as your antecedent. So A only if B is exactly the same. So again, here's the thing to remember. Remember the case we talked about way back when we first introduced it. Right? The match lights only if there's oxygen present. We're not saying the presence of oxygen guarantees a match lighting, otherwise every match everywhere is going to start burning up. Right? It's that if the match lit, there had to be some oxygen there. So the only if you see the only if by itself, you take the thing before the only as your antecedent. How about A if B? All right, started to hear it. B conditional A, right? This is one where we flip the order, right? So if you see only if, you take the thing before the only as your antecedent. If you see if in the middle by itself, you take the thing after if as your antecedent. We can paraphrase this as if B then A. So far so good? And our last one, we have A if and only if B. How do we do this one? How would we do our last? Yeah, the biconditional, right? It's the biconditional. So again, 4 different conditional structures, 3 different ways to symbolize. The key thing to remember, that these two get the same treatment. Again, if you see only if by itself, take the thing before the only as your antecedent. Trying to think if there's any other. The other one that's always useful to remember. The other structure, TFL structure that's useful to remember is neither nor. Now we talked about 2 different ways to do neither nor. So if we have neither A nor B, right? How would we symbolize neither A nor B? Do you remember the 2 ways? So that's one way, but is it, so let's think, right? Is that it? So if it's the conjunction, we want to negate both conjuncts, right? So neither nor tells us we're not getting both. Both are not, right? So if you have the conjunction, one way to do it. And what's the other way? What's the other way to do neither nor? Yeah. So our 2 ways to do neither nor. You could do a negated disjunction, or you can do a conjunction of 2 negations. Both of them entail that you're not getting nothing. I have neither tea nor coffee. There are no hot drinks that I can give you. Okay. Yes?
So can you have a quick revision to at most at least 3?
Absolutely. Let's come back to that after the break. I want to see, because I think that's going to take us a little bit more than 10 minutes to do. But yes, we'll definitely do it most and at least. Maybe, is there any, yes, please.
I think this question can be answered pretty fast, but I remember from the tutorials that we cannot use like W as a name.
Yeah.
So are there any more letters that we can?
Yes. So it's A through R for names, and then S through Z for variables. Should note, between friends, I'm not going to get mad if you use, S as a name. It'll be okay. What you really don't want to do is, I do not want to see things like X, Y, Z as names. These are the ones we definitely want to make sure we've got reserved as variables. On a related note, when it comes to building interpretations, we were talking about this just a minute ago, and I should have said, I should never, ever, ever see variables appearing in our interpretations. Right? We never define what X means. That doesn't make any sense, right? We don't say, oh, X is going to be A, right? That's fine when we're thinking about how we're filling in the sentence, but we never write that kind of thing into an interpretation. An interpretation tells me the extensions of predicates, which will always include names, the things in the domain, which always include names, and then it will tell us, right, what names refer to, which will obviously involve names. So the only kind of term we should see in interpretations are names, never variables. You had a question? Yes, sorry.
Yeah, the neither nor thing is the same as not both, right?
Good. We have to be careful here. So there's a difference between not both and both not. Okay? So let's think, right? I have neither tea nor coffee. In that case, I cannot give you coffee and I cannot give you tea. Both are not the case. But if I say not both, does that mean I don't have anything to give you? No. It just means that I don't have both. It might be I only have tea. So if we want to do not both, we do it this way. This says it's not the case that both, but that's perfectly compatible with just one of them. The difference here is that neither nor forces us into this situation where nothing is true, where neither option is true. Not both is compatible with neither being true, but also with the first one being true, or just the second one being true. Okay. Cool. Other questions on TFL? Yes, please.
How did you do unless?
Good. That's a good one. So when we think about unless, there's quite a few different ways we can go. My suggestion, and this is a suggestion, the easiest way is read unless as or. Right? So if you have A unless B, honestly, the easiest way to do it is just A or B. It feels slightly strange, and honestly, that's because the English unless is probably not strictly truth functional. So this is just about the best we can get. This isn't the only way, but this is, I think, the easiest way. So this is what I would suggest for everyone for unless. Yes?
Well, then, is that an exclusive form?
No. So this is, again, what we're aiming for here is kind of the closest we can get to capturing the English unless. Right? It's not perfect, but it is probably the best we can do. And that's really because if we think about how unless works in English, it's not going to line up with any really sensible two-place truth functional connective. Again, we're making the best we can with the tools we've got. Yes?
How
unless not, like A unless B, is that not A conditional B?
That's going to be equivalent to this. So
Oh, that's,
the other ways we can do this, we can do it not A conditional B,
yeah.
or not B conditional A. But these three are all equivalent.
Oh, okay.
So this is why I suggest just doing it this way, because what will happen a lot of times is people will mistakenly write it like this. And that's not quite right. Because this doesn't line up with our other ones. And the reason I suggest not doing the conditional with the negated antecedent is a lot of times it's easy to forget where to put the negation. The best option, just take your sentences, treat them as a disjunction, and you are done. Move on, continue. Yes?
In the return practice, did you say that this was last year's?
No, so this is one I wrote on Thursday night.
Oh, okay, because like one of the questions is from your book, and I was gonna ask if you're gonna bring some questions from your book.
No, so importantly, what I've done is I've taken so for the FOL stuff, I've taken a sample key that we've used a couple times, and then I generated some sentences. By generated, I mean I thought up some sentences. So yeah, it's all kind of, it was generated on Thursday using old keys, but that's it. Yes.
I think our questions with identity or interpretation.
So we'll come back and we can talk about that, because that goes nicely with the at least and in most stuff. So we can talk about that after the break. Any last super quick questions? So again, maybe a useful thing to finish before we go to break is, let me stress, if you're really struggling with the FOL stuff, I understand. It's much more difficult than the TFL stuff. You can score lots of points and do very well on this exam just focusing on TFL. Right? If you know how to build tables, you know how to read tables, you know how to show things using those, you're going to do just fine. Right? You're going to do just fine. And maybe one last thing to point out, when it comes to definitions, right? So as I mentioned in the slides, the first three questions are definitions. If you're going through the boxes, they're always, boxes. If you're going through the slides, definitions will always be in those bright blue boxes. Right? So they're easy to find. Second thing is, I will only ever ask you ones that have like a word in all caps, right? I'm not going to ask you for the definition of a TFL sentence, right? Or the definition of an FOL formula, right? So that can also trim it down. Right? What we're really interested in is the definition of the various semantic notions and things like that. And finally, doesn't have to be word perfect, except for the first one. You know what the first question is. Please get it word perfect. It hurts me if you don't. Okay. Shall we take a 12-minute break? So it's 1:30 now. We'll come back at 42. Cool.